Hi, it is Mike Bevel again. I will remain Mike Bevel till the end. So at some point, I'll probably stop introducing myself. This is the second episode, so maybe you still need to remember things. We're going to start with the prelude, which has nothing to do with the rest of the novel and sets the tone for the rest of the novel. So no characters are necessarily mentioned. Some are alluded to. But this is sort of what we might consider this maybe an opening argument, if you will. And then just a reminder of the plan. I will stop a lot to well, in this case, let me just tell you up front what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk a little bit about St. Theresa of Avila, because she's mentioned in the prelude. We're going to talk about an essay that George Eliot wrote called Silly Novels by, what was it? Silly Novels by Lady Novelists, which was definitely a dig at Jane Austen. And some of the other ladies who were writing in the 19th century. Turns out chick lit has had, people have been arguing about it since chicks. We'll talk a little bit about women in the 19th century in general terms. We can get specific later when we need to. We talked in the introductory video about Eliot's atheism, so we're going to talk a little bit more about that, because it's interesting that she devotes the prelude to a religious figure. So there's that. And then I want to talk a little bit maybe at the end about how books communicate to each other and with each other. And it's not as woo-woo as you think. It's a little woo-woo, but it's not as woo-woo as you think. That's a fun thing, is to watch me scoot closer, right? I want to make sure that I'm clear and I'm enunciating and you're getting everything that I'm saying. Hi, we're going to start with the prelude. Again, I'm going to read. I'm not going to do voices. I'm not going to do an accent, which absolutely means I'm going to do both things. And you're going to be embarrassed and I'm going to be embarrassed. So we just know that about each other. We're going to be embarrassed. We're going to be uncomfortable. But just love me and I will love you. And that's all I have. Prelude. Who that cares much to know the history of man and how the mysterious mixture behaves under the varying experiments of time has not dwelt, at least briefly, on the life of St. Theresa. We'll stop right there. Yeah, who? It's such an interesting, like her opening statement there is, it's a bold one, and it makes an assumption. It makes a big assumption. That if you care about the history of man, you must also have some interest in Teresa of Avila. But that's not necessarily true. And it would not even have necessarily been true in England at the time, which is Anglican at the time, and would be, like saints aren't so. Is that true? You know what? I'm on a computer. Let's find out. Here's a fun thing. Here's how we'll do this. Do Anglicans worship saints? So just a quick brief thing. It says here, although direct prayer to the saints is a practice that was continued in the first litany in English, it was not particularly encouraged after the English Reformation. It is, however, an important part of Anglo-Catholics' public and private spiritual practices. So forget everything I said. I don't know anything. Baruch Hashem for the internet. The But let's get back. And so off the bat, we have this religious figure, Teresa of Avila, that she thinks if you want to understand the condition of man, and she's using man in the gender neutral term that only worked in the 19th century and will probably never work that way again. And that's interesting, I think, that we're seeing, like right now, we're watching language mold itself to what's necessary. And that's why you guys who are prescriptivists, who want to get upset about grammar and spelling and all that, fine. I mean, it's your, I say this a lot, it's your one wild and precious life. Like, this is it. This is what you get. And at the end of it, you're done. And if you want to spend that worrying about apostrophes and there, and there, you know, that's, I can't take that from you, and I don't want to. It probably brings you comfort. I think it's silly, but that's just my opinion. So, has not, it would help if I were on the right page. But if I read the table of contents to you, that'd be a lot of fun. The other interesting thing about Teresa that isn't covered as much in Eliot's writing, but we do know is she is a Christian mystic. And Christian mystics are very interesting because they take religion and there's a blend of what you would not be wrong to suggest as some magic or some supernatural effect. And on the one hand, religion itself is nothing but a supernatural effect. It's this, yeah, guys, that's going to happen too. I'm going to learn a lot. So just love me while I learn. But what was I saying? And I can't rewind. I don't know how to edit. This is great. Don't get old because your memory becomes a sieve. We'll just keep going. Maybe the thought will come back to me. Who that cares much to know the history of man and how the mysterious mixture behaves under the varying experiments of time has not dwelt at least briefly on the life of St. Theresa, has not smiled with some gentleness at the thought of the little girl walking forth one morning hand in hand with her still smaller brother to go and seek martyrdom in the country of the Moors. Out they toddled from rugged Avila, wide-eyed and helpless-looking as two fawns, but with human hearts already beating to a national idea, until domestic realities met them in the shape of uncles, who turned them back from their great resolve. The child pilgrimage was a fit beginning. Teresa's passionate, ideal nature demanded an epic life. What were many-volumed romances of chivalry and the social conquests of a brilliant young girl to her? We'll stop here for a second. That's an interesting sentence. Let's read it one more time. Teresa's passionate ideal nature demanded an epic life. What were many-volumed romances of chivalry and the social conquests of a brilliant girl to her? So, first thing, George Eliot wrote an essay called Silly Novels by Lady Novelists, and I would like to share with you the opening paragraph. I'm not going to read the whole essay to you because I'm already reading Middlemarch to you. And so, Silly Novels by Lady Novelists opens this way. Silly novels by lady novelists are a genus with many species, determined by the particular quality of silliness that predominates in them, the frothy, the prosy, the pious, or the pedantic. But it is a mixture of all these, a composite order of feminine fatuity. Yeah, do you, has this happened to you? I'm going to do an infomercial, but I'm not really. Um, if you are a nerdy child like me who grew up a voracious reader and then um, sort of learned words by sight rather than by sound because they weren't read aloud to you, you read them to yourself and you sort of came up with your own pronunciation for things, and then you discover later that you were wrong, and it's an embarrassing feeling, and I wish it weren't. But I think one of the reasons it's an embarrassing feeling is because people react in a way that, foments embarrassment when you say the word fatuity wrong. Joey Fatone, how do you think he is handling the plague? I have not seen or heard any statement from him about how he's doing in quarantine, but I hope he's well. Um, but it is a mixture of all these, a composite order of feminine fatuity that produces the largest class of such novels, which we shall distinguish as the mind and millinery species. The heroine is usually an heiress, probably a peeress in her own right, with perhaps a vicious baronet, an amiable duke, and an irresistible younger son of a marquis as lovers in the foreground. A clergyman and a poet sighing for her in the middle distance, and a crowd of undefined ardors dimly indicated beyond. So George Eliot um, is a complicated feminist, if we want to call her a feminist. She certainly isn't looking to raise all women up, and she has opinions about what women are doing with their time. Writing was one of the few ways. Is that me doing that? Do you hear the? So I bought myself chimes. I bought myself a lot of stuff on Etsy because I'm bipolar. I like to call it manic depressive. And I was going through a state and I needed all the pretty things. So I have uh, this gong. I've got some prisms hanging from the window and this stained glass chakra thing that I don't entirely understand because I'm not a chakra person, but I'm open to anything and it just looks pretty. Anyway, we're not talking about that. We're talking about George Eliot and her attitudes toward women, which are complicated. So, one thing that happened in the introduction when I rewatched it is I started to say, how should you read a novel? And I'm going to finish that thought now, and I'm going to use Silly Novels by Lady Novelists as my reference point to keep coming back to. I think we can sometimes feel like we know an author. We may have read a biography or seen a movie about their life or a documentary about their life. And we will use that information to fill in gaps in places where we think maybe the author is trying to say something else. I think it can be a little bit dangerous. It's not, I don't think it's completely out of the question. I'm not one of those people that says you should only have the text because that's silly. And one of the things I said I wanted to talk about is sort of the way books communicate to each other. And that falls here too, but I'm going to hold on to that for just a little bit longer. I think you come to a book with your mind and your heart open. I think you should try to let the characters explain themselves to you and not let the author's life explain the character to you. And in some cases, the writer just may not get that particular emotion or characterization correct. It happens a lot. And that's just, it's places where there's bad writing. I think, though, if you look at paintings, there are places in paintings that probably aren't as well done as other parts of the painting. Like you can have little mistakes and not have it spoil the whole piece of art. And then just sort of in the spirit of sharing, I am a perfectionist, but I'm the wrong kind of perfectionist. I am the kind of perfectionist that if it isn't perfect almost instantly, I have to give up because I can't. Somewhere along the way, I picked up in my mind that if it's not perfect, it needs to be destroyed. So, like as a child, I would be given coloring books and I would start out and I would love every moment of it. And then I would color a little bit outside of the lines and I would think, well, this is ruined. I don't know how to fix this. And that has followed me into adulthood, where I will often find myself in the position of having to, yeah, there it goes again. What is it? Please, if you feel up to it in the comments, tell me what it's like watching a man with memory issues try to remember what he was saying 6 seconds ago. Anyway, I color outside the lines. It was not perfect. I didn't know how to fix it. That followed me into adult life. So like right now, like I will try step 1. I will think about step 2. If there's a third step to fix something, I'm out. I can't. If we can't fix it in 2 steps, it can't be fixed. Is my thinking, and it's not good. So this is not an advice video. I'm not in the position to give anyone any advice. I'm just sharing. So George Eliot as a feminist is interesting to talk about. We're going to talk about her biography right now. I don't want you to let this influence the novel, but you might because you're a human being and things influence things. She grew up in a religious household, and she is what I would call, she's more male identified, not because her name is George, which she wanted because the man she was with and not married to, because that guy was still married to a woman who had children with another man, and he didn't want to, if he divorced the woman, then the terrible things could happen to the children. So his name was George Henry Lewis. So she took the name George Eliot, partly because while writing was one of the few ways that women could have some kind of profession or some kind of artistic outlet, it was tough to get novels published for a while by women. And to this day, it is still tough to get things done when you're a woman. And yeah, it's not that history repeats itself. History just gets stuck in a rut. And that just goes on and on. My friend Steve told me about how when you, and this may be completely wrong, I'm sharing a thing that my friend Steve told me. We can go to Stevepedia and check it there, and it's going to confirm that Steve is right because it's Stevepedia. I don't know if Wikipedia has this or not. I'm not going to look for it. I'm just going to tell you this quick story or anecdote, which is for orchestras, professional orchestras. You audition behind a screen so they can't see you. But what was happening like back in the day is you could tell the difference between a man's shoe and a woman's shoe by sound. So when women realized, oh, even though it's supposed to be blind testing, they can still seem to tell I'm a woman, they started taking their shoes off so that the sound of their shoes wouldn't give away their femininity or their femaleness, whatever that means. So George Eliot also is she's critical in a sense. I think she wants writing to be her career, and she wants it to be a professional career, and I think she wants it to not, she doesn't want to be lumped in among the silly lady novelists. And there's a lot to unpack there, because on the one hand, it's, pretty sexist of her to not want to identify as a lady novelist, because she's a lady novelist and she should be proud of it. And on the other hand, I can feel for her a little bit, because she wants to write novels about ideas and about morality. And what is coming out from women are these sort of frothy domestic stories. And that's a tension for Eliot for most of what she's trying to get done. She also, for a while, was the sole breadwinner, because George Henry Lewis was a writer as well, but not as well published as George Eliot, and they lived a lot off of the money that she made. We have gone way too far off path, haven't we? Let's get back to the book. Her flame quickly burned up that light fuel, and fed from within, soared after some illimitable satisfaction, some object which would never justify weariness, which would reconcile self-despair with the rapturous consciousness of life beyond self. She found her epos. I think it's epos. Is it epos? Tell me. I dare you. She found her epos in the reform of a religious order. Baptist Teresa's mysticism. One of the things that I find interesting, especially about these early church, and church with a capital C, which generally means Catholic church, sort of artfully blends magic and religion. And St. Teresa had mystical experiences. She believed she levitated. She would have her sisters hold her down. Modern psychiatrists and doctors reading about these accounts, tried to diagnose a woman from the 1500s with some sort of mental illness. What if she floated? What if she did float? What if that happened? So anyway, I think her mysticism is interesting, and it's not interesting to Eliot, who doesn't seem to mention at any point that Teresa of Avila was a mystic. Also, Teresa of Avila's autobiography was The Life of Teresa of Jesus, and that is some bold move. Here we go. That Spanish woman who lived 300 years ago was certainly not the last of her kind. Many Teresas have been born who found for themselves no epic life, wherein there was a constant unfolding of far resonant action. Perhaps only a life of mistakes, the offspring of a certain spiritual grandeur, ill-matched with the meanness of opportunity. Perhaps a tragic failure which found no sacred poet and sank unwept into oblivion. So we're going to stop there. There's two things we're going to talk about now. One is just a little phrase that Eliot uses here, and it is, she writes, perhaps only a life of mistakes. And there is a gorgeous poem by Anne Sexton that I'm going to share with you. And I think it might be okay to share a poem. I don't know. Somebody will sue me. We'll find out. I'll have to sell my crystals. I put all my money in crystals. So there's a poem from Anne Sexton called For John, Who Begs Me Not to Inquire Further. Not that it was beautiful, but that in the end there was a certain sense of order there, something worth learning in that narrow diary of my mind, in the commonplaces of the asylum where the cracked mirror or my own selfish death outstared me. And if I tried to give you something else, something outside of myself, you would not know that the worst of anyone can be finally an accident of hope. I tapped my own head. It was a glass, an inverted bowl. It is a small thing to rage in your own bowl. At first it was private. Then it was more than myself. It was you, or your house, or your kitchen. And if you turn away because there is no lesson here, I will hold my awkward bowl with all its cracked stars shining like a complicated lie, and fasten a new skin around it as if I were dressing an orange or a strange sun. Not that it was beautiful, but that I found some order there. There ought to be something special for someone in this kind of hope. This is something I would never find in a lovelier place, my dear, although your fear is anyone's fear, like an invisible veil between us all, and sometimes in private. My kitchen, your kitchen, my face, your face. So, yeah, we went through that whole Anne Sexton poem just because I love the line, the worst of anyone can be finally an accident of hope. And I would encourage you to think about what that phrase might mean to you. And I will share with you what I think it means to me another time, because I don't want to influence your thinking. But I think that line, the worst of anyone can be finally an accident of hope, is worth examining. And I connect it to perhaps only a life of mistakes, the offspring of a certain spiritual grandeur ill-matched with the meanness of opportunity. So when we talk about books communicating with each other, hold on, put a pin in that. We're not there yet. We're going to talk about that a little further down. I said there were two things I wanted to talk about. Oh, right. Also, I want to talk a little bit about the line, a tragic failure which found no sacred poet and sank unwept into oblivion. And I think what Eliot is getting at there is the idea that a person's fame or a person's notoriety or a person's immortality, you might say, depends on the fact, I think my brother's, yeah, it does this. This is just real life happening right now. That's going to be annoying. That is going to be annoying. You talk amongst yourselves. I'll be right back. Like Ed Wood, there are no cuts. Just, you get the full Becky on this. But, you know, the fact that she's saying that there were many Theresas who we don't know because they didn't have someone to champion them. They didn't have a poet. They didn't have a biographer. They didn't have someone who thought their life was worth writing down. So, with dimmed lights and tangled circumstances, they tried to shape their thought and deed in noble agreement. But after all, to common eyes, their struggle seemed more inconsistency and formlessness. For these later born Theresas, and that's going to be our heroine, Dorothea Brooke, were helped by no coherent social faith and order which could perform the function of knowledge for the ardently willing soul. Their ardor alternated between a vague ideal and the common yearning of womanhood, so that the one was disproved as extravagance and the other condemned as a lapse. We need to talk about that section right there. So let's read it again. Where do we want to start? These later born Theresas were helped by no coherent social faith and order which could perform the function of knowledge for the ardently willing soul. So again, these later day Theresas do not have people in their life. Like, they're doing just as heroic things. And maybe part of what Eliot is saying is the unwritten life is as worthy as the written life, and not every Theresa is going to have an effect because she won't have a way to get that message out there. And she won't have a way to get that message out there in the 19th century because she's a woman. And as we talked about, it's difficult for women to get published in the 19th century. They eventually do get published, and well, but it takes a while and it takes some doing. And there's this interesting thing that happens. So you've got these 19th century male authors who are just writing their asses off. Trollope has, I think this is, you can quote me on this, like 1 billion books are written by Anthony Trollope. And Charles Dickens has a pretty large oeuvre. Oprah is a thing that only a certain demographic is going to get. So, where was I going with this? Yeah, you need to prepare better, buddy. People are going to just lose their mind. Their ardor alternated between a vague ideal and the common yearning of womanhood, so that the one was disapproved as extravagance. So that means that vague ideal, like having ardor for a vague ideal, was considered an extravagance. The ardor alternated between a vague ideal and the common yearning of womanhood, so that the one was disapproved as extravagance, and the other condemned as a lapse. And so it's that, I think it's that yearning that's considered sort of a lapse in womanhood. Women should not be yearning for things, is an argument that George Eliot isn't making, but she is introducing because she's going to spend this whole novel with women and men. We're almost done, and this is just one page. So this is going to be a nightmare for, I mean, just click stop right now. It's not going to, it's going to be this, but it's going to be this for like 400 pages, almost 500 pages, over 500 pages. God, if I keep turning pages, more pages are going to appear. Some have felt that these blundering lives are due to the inconvenient indefiniteness with which the supreme power has fashioned the natures of women. Okay, yeah, that is a common thread up to today, that women's roles within the church are women's roles. And when women want to do male roles, and let's take a sidebar and say, I'm using those words in their stereotypical meaning, because it will take us forever the other way. But know that I'm not being a gender essentialist. The 19th century is pretty gender essentialist. We're starting to publish more and more queer accounts from the 19th century, but it's taken us a while. So the idea that women were created weaker, that women were created to be mothers and homemakers and peace givers, the angel in the house, It may be a phrase you've heard before. It's from a poem by a man named Coventry Patton, or Patton Coventry. Who wrote, it's a good thing we got the computer right here. Coventry Patmore. Now I won't get Alzheimer's because I remembered it on my own. Okay, so if there were one level of feminine incompetence as strict as the ability to count 3 and no more, the social lot of women might be treated with scientific certitude. Meanwhile, the indefiniteness remains, and the limits of variation are really much wider than anyone would imagine from the sameness of women's coiffure and the favorite love stories in prose and verse. Just another quick thing, like books talking to other books. This isn't I'm really reaching here, but what are arms for if not to reach and hug people and eat delicious eggs? That thing about count 3 and no more reminded me of Richard Adams and Watership Down and the way that he writes about the rabbits, and that the rabbits can count like it's 1, 2, 3, 4, many. So 5 and above are all the same concept, which is a lot. I just thought that was interesting and neat. Meanwhile, the indefiniteness remains, and the limits of variation are really much wider than anyone would imagine from the sameness of women's coiffure and the favorite love stories in prose and verse. Here and there, a cygnet is reared uneasily among the ducklings in the brown pond, and never finds the living stream in fellowship with its own oary-footed kind. Here and there is born a St Theresa, foundress of nothing, whose loving heartbeats and sobs, after an unattained goodness, tremble off and are dispersed among hindrances, instead of centering in some long, recognizable deed. And we have finished the prelude, and it only took us an hour. It didn't take an hour. It felt like an hour. Maybe it will take us an hour by the time I finish saying goodbye. So we've got the stage set for us. We're going to be dealing with women in Middlemarch. We're going to be dealing with aspirations. We're going to be dealing with women's ideas and women's thoughts. So I'm very excited about all that. And again, I know I've never finished all of Middlemarch. I've read enough that I can sound really smart. We're eventually going to get to the parts of Middlemarch that I haven't read, and then it's going to be, oh boy. Anyway, thank you, for spending time with me and listening to me ramble about everything and read to you. And we will do this again tomorrow.